Hello, in this lesson we will be going over the basics of perspective. Now, when you are creating a piece and you need to have really accurate or really strong perspective, there are a couple things you need to set up. The first one is the horizon line. So that's kind of where your ground or your X meets your sky or your Y. Because when you are drawing things, you need to take into account how close it is to the ground and how high up, and then you'll also take into account your view, because if you're looking at, say, a box and you're looking at it dead on, you'll see the front face and you might see a little bit of the sides, but you won't see much of the top. Whereas if you're looking from a elevated position down at something like, say, a box, you are going to see a lot of the top. You'll see probably a majority of the front, and you'll see a lot of one side, but you might not see a whole lot of the other. So this horizon line kind of helps set up where your viewport is. Now on this horizon line, there's something called a vanishing point. A vanishing point is where all your lines will converge. So think of a desert road. The part of the road and the part of the scenery that's really close to where you're standing, the sides of the roads are really far apart. You can see things really clearly, but as you look further and further away from you, you'll notice that as your view gets closer to the horizon line, it kind of looks like the road is getting narrower and narrower. And then objects that are further in distance, they also kind of lose some of their definition. They look really small. So that vanishing point is that point in your view where it looks like the road just kind of disappears. And in this piece, I only have, you can see, one vanishing point. That means this is a 1-point perspective. There are actually multiple kinds of perspective that you can set up. The more vanishing points you have, the more complicated the piece usually is. So, for instance, you have what I just showed you, which is 1-point perspective. So all your converging lines go towards 1 point off in the horizon. There is also 2-point perspective, which means you have 2 vanishing points. And you can see that there are converging lines that are coming from this, that go to this direction towards that vanishing point. And then there's another set that go towards this vanishing point on that part of the horizon line. The second one is, or the third one is called 3-point perspective. And the third vanishing point for this is usually set up where you have 2 vanishing points on the horizon line, and then you have a third vanishing point below or above the horizon line. This helps you set up scenes where maybe you're looking at a really steep downward view. These are really hard to pull off. I usually just stick with traditional 1 point, maybe 2 if I want a more complicated object. So the final piece that I have to talk about are what I call reference lines. Reference lines help you set up your object. So like over here, you can see how all of the reference lines travel back to this vanishing point, but each line helps me set up one side of the rectangle here. So these reference lines help you get the right angle of the sides of your object, and they can also help you kind of figure out what faces of your object you would be able to see depending on where it's placed on this grid here and depending on how tall it is. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do very simple 1-point perspective with just making simple shapes, because if you know how to make the shapes, then you can practice with adding more details onto them, and a cube can turn into a building, a cylinder can turn into a can of pop. So it's good to practice creating the very basic shape. So I have my horizon line set up, and I have my vanishing point set up. Where you place your horizon line doesn't really matter too much. It kind of depends on just how low or steep you want your viewpoint to be. I usually like to put it up in like the top third, so that way I have a lot of room to work with down here. And again, it doesn't really matter where you put your vanishing point either. It just depends on where your viewpoint is and how you're going to look at these objects. So I'm just going to leave my vanishing point there and my horizon line there. Now the first thing I want to point out is no matter where your object is down here, your vanishing point and your horizon line will never ever move. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up the first of my reference lines. So I want to make sure that the end of the reference line goes in the center of my vanishing point here. And if you hover over the object, and I'm just using my stroke tool to make these lines, but if you hover over it, it can be a little difficult to see, but if you are over the center, it will tell you that you're over the center in Illustrator. So I'm just going to make my first reference line, and that is going to be if I'm looking at the object, that'll be the left side of the object, and it'll be the bottom edge as well. So I've got my first reference line, then I'm going to draw my second one, so that way it's kind of making a V shape. And this will help me set up the bottom face of my rectangular prism. So if I say that I want my front edge to be really close to the camera, so I'm going to put it right here. So that's where the front edge of my rectangle is going to be. And if you need to tweak lines and stuff like that, remember your black arrow selects entire objects and your white arrow selects anchor points, paths, and handles. So just make sure that that front edge is touching both of your reference lines. And then you're going to make the back edge and decide how deep the object is. There we go. Alright, so now I've basically got the bottom face of my rectangle laid out. And then from here, I just need to decide how tall it's going to be. So I'm going to grab my stroke tool again, and I'm just going to go straight up. And I'm going to make the decision, say I want it to be that tall. So now I'll grab my reference line, and I want to set up this top edge right here. So I'm just having my reference line meet the top of this side here. And then since I've moved that reference line, I'm going to go ahead and just close up this side of the rectangle by just connecting these 2 points here. And then because I have the reference line meeting this top of this edge here, I can go ahead and build this back edge. And I just go up until I meet that reference line. Okay, so now I need to build up this side, but I know it's really tempting, but you can't just go and copy this edge from here over to here, because that's just not how the perspective works. It might be slanted, and one edge might look taller or shorter depending on what your perspective is. But there is something that I do know, and what I do know is that the front edge going along the top is going to go straight across. And the reason I know that is because all lines that are, say, going left to right, they will always be parallel with your horizontal line, which means that the lines that are going left to right, they will never intersect with the horizon. So they will always just stay perfectly parallel with the horizon. So because I know that this top edge is parallel with the horizon, I just made a stroke that goes straight across there, and I have made it go further than what I know I need. And then what I'm going to do is now that I have that top front edge, I can go over to this corner here, and I can just go straight up until I meet that parallel line. And then I just use my white arrow to bring it in. So now I've got the front face of my rectangle. And since I have that, I can grab this reference line, have it meet up at that corner, and then that can help me build that final edge. So I'm going to go to the back edge here. I'm going to go directly across to that reference line. And then I can build up this edge here. And then if I move my reference lines out of the way, I need to add one more stroke over here. And if this was a transparent cube, I would connect this point with this point here, and I would just go between these two to do that edge. So this is what it looks like if you could see through the rectangle, but we want to make a solid shape. So I'm going to get rid of all the lines that I wouldn't be able to see if this face and this face and this face were all solid opaque objects. So I would need to get rid of those 3 lines, and then I'm just going to change the color of that one. So you can see I've got the start of a rectangle here, and I could then turn that into a shop, a home, whatever I wanted, or like a treasure chest, something like that. So I'm going to do that one more time, except this time I think I'm going to create a shape that's butting up right against this rectangle. So I'm going to grab this reference line, and it's going to follow the same line as that edge there, and then I'm going to put this other reference line, let's say right there, and then I'm going to make the front edge of my rectangle. So I'm just going to say it's going to start there. So I'm going to go straight across to this other reference line, and then I'm going to create the back edge. So I think I'm going to make this really long and skinny. So I started off with my shape, just making the front and back edges. And then from there, I pick a corner and I choose what height I want it to be at. And once I have that first height line set up, I can grab one of my reference lines and connect it with the top of that height line. I connect these 2 points, that way I have that bottom edge there. And then from there, I can go from this reference point straight down to the edge or the corner right there. And then I don't quite know where this height line needs to end, so I'm just going to start at this side and just go straight across, and I'm going to go further than what I need. And then I can go over to this corner here and go straight up, and I now know how tall that height line needs to be, and I just fix that top front edge. Then I just grab my reference line, put it at the corner I need it to go at. Then I can create this height line, go up to the reference line. Then I can create the top back edge. And I can create this side as well. There we go. Then I just move my reference lines out of the way, plug up any holes I have, and fix any corners I need to. And then because this is a solid box, I need to get rid of some of these interior lines here. Now, another problem I have is I want to get rid of part of this box here, so I'm just going to select these lines, and I'm just going to use my Add Anchor Point tool to add a point on that line. And then I'm going to add a point there as well. So now if I go in with my Delete Anchor tool, I can get rid of part of those lines there. So those are how to do 2 rectangular prisms. Go ahead and practice with making a third one real quick. And I'm going to do that, except I'm going to put this one in the back here. Okay, next is I'm going to show you how to make a pyramid. Now, a pyramid has a similar base to a box, so we'll just make a rectangle to set up, but the top part is made up of triangles. So traditionally, at least in equilateral triangles, this point here is in the midpoint of the bottom here. So in order to find the middle of something, especially if you are working in perspective, the easiest point to find the middle is to connect opposing corners, and then where those lines intersect, that's where the top of our pyramid will go. So we know that the points will all look like that. So in order to set that up, I'm just going to grab my reference lines here. And then I'm going to grab my stroke tool and I'm going to make the front edge. And remember, the front edge needs to be parallel with the horizontal. Same with the back edge. So now, rather than doing that height line that we did with the rectangles, what we're going to do is we're going to connect opposite corners here. And I now know that the center of my pyramid is right there. So rather than making the height lines over here, I'm going to go to this center point or this midpoint. Then I'm just going to go straight up. And this is going to decide how tall my pyramid is. So now that I have that set up, I can go to these corners here, and I can make my triangles where the top corner is going to meet up with that height line. And then I can move my reference lines. And I can clean up my shape a little bit. There we go. Next up is going to be a cylinder. So it's going to be a similar principle where in order to set up the cylinder, we want to set up a base for it that looks like a rectangle. So I'm going to make the front edge of my rectangle. And then once we have the base worked out, from there we can kind of just shave the corners off and give it more rounded edges. But again, we need to figure out where the midpoint is, so that way we can figure out where the highest point of our curves are going to go. So I'm going to connect these opposite corners here. And I now know my midpoint goes through there. So I'm going to grab my reference line and I'm going to make it go through the midpoint. I'm just going to move this one off to the side so it's out of the way. I'm going to finish off that base there. And then from here, I know midpoint is there. I know midpoint is there. And then by following this reference point, I know a midpoint is right there and there. Here we go. Okay, so now I'm just going to move these out of the way. And then I'm just going to make a circle. I'm not going to worry about getting it right off the bat. I just want to make the basic circle, and then I'm going to put these points at the midpoint. From there, the nice thing about Illustrator is I can just grab these handles here and I can adjust them so that way the handles follow the edges, and then I can pull up on the handles to help adjust those curves so it looks a bit more rounded. So I want to do my best just to make sure that these curves are about the same on each corner. Okay. So then if I got rid of... Don't get rid of your lines. I'm just doing this to show you kind of what the base looks like without all the guides. So now you can see that would be the base of my cylinder. But I'm not going to get rid of all these lines quite yet because I need to build the face that goes on the top of the cylinder, because I can't just copy and paste this face down here, because the amount that we'll be able to see the top won't be the same as what we'd be able to see if we were looking down at the circle like this. So we're going to start building out the rest of the rectangular cage here. So I'm going to make that first height line to decide how tall my rectangle is. I'm going to move this reference line to meet there. Then I'm going to make this back edge. Then I'm going straight across, making that edge, adjusting these. And then from there, now that I have this top face, I can go ahead and start making those guides. So I'm going to connect these opposite points. Then I'm going to make this reference line go through the middle there. Then I mark out that midpoint, that midpoint, there we go. And then from there I can do what we did down here, where we just put down the circle and then we edit so that way the curve is going around there, but the highest points are hitting those midpoints. Then I just adjust these curves. Be careful at going too extreme with them, because then you can get like flat edges. You just want enough so that way it's glancing those midpoints. There we go. Then I can kind of start getting rid of some of the cage here. Then all I have to do is just make any adjustments to the circles that you need, and then I just have to connect the widest point of the cylinder to the second widest point. Again, you might have to make some adjustments. There we go. And then to get rid of this back edge, because it's a solid object, I can just use my add anchor point and delete anchor point tools. So there you go. That's how you work with very simple perspective. Now, the next assignment is what you have to do is you need to make a room using this perspective method. Now, that can be a bit daunting when you start out, but basically the first step to make the room is, once you have your horizon and vanishing point set up, is you just make a really big rectangle. So I'm going to set up my reference lines. And I'm actually going to move all this up a little bit. And then I just, once I have it set up the way I want, I just put the front edge in. Put the back edge in. Put in the first height line. Move the reference line to meet up with that new height line. And then I can build up this very back edge. Then I make the top parallel line, go further than what I know I'll need, and then I can go straight up to make that connection. Then I move this reference line to where those two intersect. Build out that edge, build out this one, and then just connect these two. Then I can move these reference lines out of the way. So there we go, and if I were to just hide all these, that would be the inside of my room, because we don't have a face of the rectangle obstructing our view, so we can look straight into the rectangle and we can see these lines. And then from there I can just start building my objects. So let's say I want to make a chair, I can start building out a rectangle. And same process, I just make a rectangle. So there we go. This is a really boxy chair, and you'd want to go in and kind of refine it so that way maybe the edges are a little bit more curved and it looks a bit more like a cushion and less like a bunch of boxes stacked together. But basically you would use those reference lines to build out the basic shape of it, and then you can go in with like your paintbrush tool or something and start adding in the little details like the roundness of cushion, maybe like a tear in the fabric, things like that. So that is just a very basic overview about working with perspective and how you can apply it to a kind of more natural setting rather than just making a bunch of geometric shapes. The best advice for working with perspective is just practice, practice, practice. when you're working, it's really easy to get halfway through and think this looks really weird. I would just suggest to keep pushing through until you finish the shape, because sometimes it's not until the very end where it actually starts to kind of look like what you were trying to make it out to be. So there you go. That's how to set up the simple one-point assignment and a start to how you might go about making your perspective rooms.